Keith Wood has been waiting very patiently on the line. Morning, Keith.
Morning, gents. How are you?
Keeping
Tommy
well?
gets very excited, you know.
Well, he's living down in Clare there, so I'm sure there's something in the water that gets him excited down below. You know yourself. Um,
Do.
Listen, the Eddie Jones stuff. What's going on here? Dave Rennie. A lot of people feel a little bit sorry for him. The timing has got a lot of people talking. World Cup year, but the fact that he was talking to them for 14 months, Keith, behind England's backs. This is mad stuff, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think Rennie was under a huge amount of pressure. I think there were a lot of conversations over the last period of time because of the losses. Now, if you look at Australian rugby, and more, I think, than any other country, if Australia don't play well, people are able to walk away in droves. I mean, the Australian crowds they're not fickle, but they have an expectation of success, and if the success isn't there, they don't support it. I mean, they become incredibly aggressive with it, and I think that was happening for a while. And I do feel the players were behind Dave Rennie, but I just think when the opportunity arose with Eddie Jones, that Australian rugby were going to go for it because. And I know the conversations have been there for a while, but the conversations were for him to take over as director of rugby for Australian rugby post the 23 World Cup. It wasn't for a conversation beforehand. I think most people will be having conversations to what they're going to do in the future. So I think we can go for conspiracy theories very quickly, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case. However, when they do get him, and they have got him, I expect them to get a bounce pretty quickly. And he has a history of delivering in the short to medium term in pretty much every team he's ever gone to. And look, I think he kind of breaks everybody after about 2 years, but in that 2 year period, he could do amazing things. So I would have said it was an incredibly smart piece of business on behalf of Australia, because they get a guy who has huge rugby capital, has been ousted from a team. In the same group, will have an awful lot of the IP of the team and the players in his arsenal for them. I think it's fantastic business for Australia, and it's whether he's able to keep that for a longer period of time, because consistently, I think he kind of loses patience after a couple of years. But this is 9 months he has first, and I think he could do a really good job.
The severance package or lack of I guess a clause from the RFU in the severance package with Eddie Jones to prevent him coaching rivals. The RFU saying they didn't adopt that package for legal and moral reasons. I mean, is this going to be a lesson, Keith, do you think, for other rugby unions, international rugby unions, to stop this kind of thing happening again in the World Cup year?
Yeah, it's funny. I looked at that phraseology of legal and moral reasons. For legal reasons, if it's in the contract, that if they do get rid of him, but they got rid of him, he didn't walk away. So for that, it becomes quite hard for them to tie him down. And his team did a great job. That's the way I would look at it. They did a great job. But funny, I get stuck on this myself often, because you would think in a lot of cases that if you lose a job, people still have to work, still have to make money, and still have bills to pay, a whole variety of different things. You can't really, or you don't really want to restrain them. I think it's unusual in this instance because it just looks a little bit wrong. But I think they've just done his guys have just done a very good job with him to make certain that he is employable very quickly. Putting in elements are difficult. The moral side of it is an entertaining view, but I think he has. He came out and said he wouldn't talk to any of the England people if he met them now. Like, he's so bitter with it. I just hope we don't get into this other slagging match that happens consistently. I mean, we don't want the game necessarily being about a coach talking and bad mouthing other players or other individuals or other countries. We want to see it to be about the rugby, if at all possible. And it can be entertaining in the short term, but after a bit of period of time it becomes a bit tedious. So look, I hope he just gets on with the idea. If he brings back a lot of players that have been injured in Australia are on the right side of the draw. They have a history of competing incredibly well in World Cups. I think they'll do a really good job.
Eddie Jones has come back to bite Australia many, many times since he went to England, as 10 wins in their 11 tests against Australia. Culture fit wise, like Eddie Jones, the last year, the amount of stories that have come out about his relationships with other staff members, there was talk of leaving players in tears. Is he a better culture fit for Australian rugby, that abrasiveness, than he was in England?
I think he's a great fit in the short term for nearly any country. I think he can shake things up very quickly. I think when it looks, for me, when I look back in his time in England, I think he used too many players and he brought them in very early, whether it was on a whim or not, but they got discarded very early. You look at Steve Borthwick's first squad and there has to be an awful lot of what was there, because they'd picked everybody in the country pretty much. But when you see a player like Ben Earl, who is pulling up trees and has done consistently, and he hasn't had a look in for the last number of years. So I think in a short term, I think he's extraordinary, actually. In a long term, I think at times he's given too much power to be able to do different things. And I think we discussed this a couple of weeks ago, just on players. If you fall out of favour with a coach, your career is very, very short as a player. If you fall out of favour with a coach, and that coach is there for a long period of time, you mightn't be an international player, and look, I think he'll do. I believe he'll do an extraordinary job. I think he'll make it incredibly difficult for England when it comes to World Cup time.
Like when you say he'd be a good short-term fit for any country, Keith, to play devil's advocate, it's not that long ago that there were boos in Twickenham and everyone's calling for his head, and it's the worst time that England have had in years, certainly under Jones's tenure. And often when Australia go back to another manager years later, I think he left in 2005, it's almost like the second coming of Jose Mourinho. Maybe it won't be as good as the first time. Like, is there added pressure on Eddie Jones?
Well, again, he said he thinks he's one big job left in him. This is his home. He gets an opportunity to be the coach of the World Cup, and then to go for another World Cup and a Lions tour. For me, I think that's an awkward one for him, because I don't know that he has the amount of players in Australia to be able to sustain that for that period of time. But if you go back to the start of his English career, and the first couple of years, he won a Grand Slam and a championship, won 18 matches on the trot, which is a world record. He has that capacity to shake things up very, very quickly. Whether he'll be able to do it, that's entirely difficult, or difficult to kind of surmise. Look, I'd spoken to some of the Australians before the Australia game. I had a really interesting conversation as to where they think they were going and they were trying to go. For them, they need winning, and they need to be financially secure as well as possible. There's the benefit of the Lions tour going down there. And the reason that that's a benefit is that it puts a huge amount of money in their coffers, and they need it. So it's kind of at that right time to be able to make those things. It won't be as kind of flahuluk as it was with the money in England, where a lot of his programs went over budget. It'll be tighter, but I actually think there can be an Eddie Jones bounce.
Okay, remains to be seen. We'd love to see that England-Australia match-up in the knockout rounds of the World Cup. It'll be juicy anyway, entertaining, as you say as well, Keith. The Irish squad being named tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We've had our own Cameron Hill on the show this morning, given quite an interesting suggestion that maybe Ross Byrne and Jack Crowley could be alternating number 10s throughout the Six Nations, and Johnny Sexton will be given a rest. Do you expect any mad surprises along those lines in the squad and then in the selection from Andy Farrell ultimately?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything mad, actually. And I think one thing Andy Farrell is incredibly consistent with his selection, and he understands, I think, very keenly that international rugby is about winning. It is about trying to develop a performance mindset, which I think they have done. I think they played incredibly well in the autumn. got the results, played well, didn't play well in some, weren't overly happy with it. Finding out a lot about his players. Ross Byrne is playing a bit better, I think. And I do see a few changes in him. But again, we like, this is like a perennial conversation with Johnny Sexton as to who's going to take the jersey off him, because he's not relinquishing it.
Is the big disappointment, Keith, that again, Joey Carberry at the weekend, fortnight out from the Six Nations, isn't putting in a performance that you're going, actually, this guy on form needs to start? That you're looking at the performance last weekend, and there were good bits, and obviously they're start the game brilliantly and struggle after the red card. But was that a commanding enough performance that Andy Farrell sitting up going, well, actually, I don't need to rush Johnny back?
No, but I don't think it was a performance to say that you have to pick him ahead of Johnny. It wasn't. I thought he played pretty well, but I think he stalled somewhat. I think that ankle injury for him took an awful lot out of him over the last few years. I do think he, again, we discussed this last week, I actually think he plays better for Ireland than he does with Munster. With better players around him that are used to playing at a higher level. I think he actually does play well with it. Again, I just don't know that anybody is putting Johnny under that amount of pressure. And look, we've talked about this a lot, but I still think that the manner in which Ireland are playing, and Leinster for a large part, protects the 10 a lot more. But you do need the capacity to hit the line fast from time to time. That isn't happening as much with any of our 10s. So while that continues to be the case, it actually puts Ross Byrne further up the pecking order. And I still think, as it stands at the moment, Ross Byrne is there. Joey is there, and Crowley is getting the chances now. And the more Crowley plays, the better chance he has. The more they get exposure at international level, the better it is. But we still want to try and win this tournament. But it's whether you just drop somebody in entirely and risk losing. But I think we dropped guys in the autumn and we didn't lose. So, look, I think you're looking at the whole board as much as you possibly can and play the players that you have to maximise what we have for now and for the World Cup. And that's a balancing act that Farrell has to deal with.
I think Gavin Coombs said not being in the November international squad was a bit of a kick up the arse for him. And I mean, if you look at his performances now, Keith, maybe it was the kick up the arse that he 100% needed. Like the likes of him, someone massively in form. Like, do you include the likes of Gavin Coombs? Is he someone on the edge of the squad, or where would you see his ceiling being at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think he's got a very high ceiling. He also was injured. He's it takes a while to come back from injury as well. His form had dipped. He didn't look fit enough, and like that isn't for a guy not looking after himself for fitness. But fitness can be injury and anything else as well that goes with it. But I think he's playing really, really well in the style that Munster need him to play well at, but he's doing a huge amount of work now. And I think if you look at his work rate at the moment, it seems to be a lot higher. So obviously people are going to talk about him more. But I would say Caelan Dars is magnificent at the moment. So, but what you're always looking for are changes in the team. So what way are we going to be set? Are we always going to have Peter O'Mahony type 6, and if not, if we go for more power in different matches, you could end up with Gavin Coombs at 6, and fine, because like we need players coming from, and actually you need players coming from every province. There's Leinster doing incredibly well, and there's so many players coming from Leinster. It's fantastic, but you do need the blend from different places, and you need the different types of player. And I will say Gavin Coombs is different. His ability to short carry and power over, and that's an essential part of the game, is pretty phenomenal. His strike rate is incredible for Munster at the moment.
The overall balance of the squad then that'll be named tomorrow. We were talking about Jamie Osborne's performance on Monday, and Rory O'Connor was saying like maybe it's just that little bit too late to make a run towards the squad now, 8 months out. And there's players like Conor Murray and Keith Earls who didn't make the Munster squad but have so much money in the bank when it comes to what they've done for Ireland through the years. Are we heading to the stage actually where it is too late for bolters, that the Jimmy O'Brien got in just in time, and that the Conor Murrays and Keith Earls and Bundy Aki, who I know Andy Friend has backtracked maybe somewhat on what was said at the weekend, that those guys have done it for their country, and that's probably the first thing Andy Farrell will be thinking about now?
Well, Farrell thinks about his team. He's not really thinking about the other teams. And I know when he says he picks players on form, he can also go back to what happened in the autumn. For me, Osborne, it isn't too late, actually. If he is showing a size and a capability and a stepping capability that, we can definitely use. That's the way I would look at it. So if I was Farrell, I would have him in the squad, because he's going to learn an awful lot in the squad anyway. And if the chance comes and you can pick him, you pick him. We've had a lot of injuries in 12. Look, I think Gary Ringrose has been playing phenomenal rugby, like a really fantastic season. Henshaw has been injured. Bundy has been in and out with suspension and bits of injuries as well. We have to see who we have at our disposal. If this is the next guy on the line, we need to see him in the squad. So no, I don't think it's too late ever, because what you're looking for is a spark, and are they able to be manoeuvred into the system? Because that's what you need to be able to do. Farrell needs to know that if you bring a new guy in, that he doesn't dismantle parts of the system to make that happen. And I think he seems to have the aptitude in which to do it, which is more on a lot of injuries, and now he's playing. So you have to give these guys a chance. When they play really well, you have to give them a chance,
Yeah, for sure. Going to be very interesting to see if we have any surprise omissions or inclusions in tomorrow's squad around this time tomorrow. Keith, brilliant insight as always. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Cheers, gents.